Hi, I'm Mpaala and this is Sermon in 5. This is part 4 of a 10 Commandment series, and today I'll be focusing on adultery. So, if we read Exodus chapter 20 verse 14, it says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." So what is adultery in this verse? Adultery is having sexual relations or sexual intercourse with somebody who is not your husband or your wife. But in this verse, there's an additional term to it which speaks to more to the mental, and it says that, adultery can also be preconceived intentions or preconceived thoughts of lusting after another individual. If we look at Matthew 5 verse 28, it says that whosoever lusteth after a woman hath already committed adultery in his heart. So even though you haven't committed the act of adultery, you develop an attitude of adultery. Now, why is that equally bad? That's because you have to realize that as a man thinketh, so he doeth. So thoughts begin to turn into actions, and actions solidified become and develop a person's character. So now, having this picture of adultery and its term in mind, we can kind of deduce a couple of reasons why it's bad. Firstly, on a more obvious basis, it destroys relationships. So in the context of relationships, adultery is a breakage of a covenant that you make with another individual in a relationship. And by breaking this covenant, we disobey God because He's deemed this covenant to be sacred. And by partaking in this activity, we contaminate the sanctity of this relationship. Secondly, and not commonly focused on, adultery is an aspect wherein we rob ourselves, because if we look at this relationship and the sanctity that it ought to have, there are blessings that God wants to provide us with in this relationship. And so by partaking in adultery, we rob ourselves of the blessings that God wants to give us through this relation. Lastly, and but not least, adultery is simply degrading, which again disobeys God, because according to God, each individual is priceless, and by degrading each other, we kind of take away from the priceless and equal nature that God wishes us to have. Now, having considered the bad effects of adultery, I believe that there are certain aspects that we can implement to kind of help us around this sin. The first, I believe, is once we develop a respect for who God is and His law and what He says a relationship ought to look like and what it ought to be, we can begin to respect and to not commit this sin. In addition to that, we need to also respect the partner we are within the relationship, because it's only then that if we respect our partner that we're in this relationship with, we're less likely to commit adultery. Lastly, I believe that we also need to respect ourselves as individuals and the bodies that God has entrusted to us, because we are stewards of this body, and in committing adultery, it takes a toll physically, mentally, morally on our bodies, and in order to avoid this toll, we should refrain from adultery. This is my message on adultery. Thank you for listening, and God bless.